on Trinity on board a train. Trinity removes a tracking bug from his eye that has been implanted earlier in what he thought was a dream. A bit similar to the scene in The Matrix where they take the tracking bug out of Keanu Reeves' stomach, where they suck it out through his belly button. It always grosses me, that bit. They are then pursued on the train by agents until the detective starts to change into an agent, and Trinity has no other choice but to shoot him before he can change completely. Before Trinity leaves, she turns to him and tells him for what it's worth she thinks that he could have handled the truth, and then she jumps out of the window of the moving train. It would seem that she was planning to free him all along. And the final short is called Matriculated. It starts with a woman sat looking out at the sea. Two hunter robots called runners emerge from the sea and give chase. The runners chase a woman back to her base, where a reprogrammed robot fights the runners. One robot gets destroyed, but the other robot runner destroys the reprogrammed robot. But then the woman appears and shoots the runner robot with an electrical gun that kills the robot's power. Did you follow that? The base is ran by a group of scientists. They get the runner into the Matrix and then proceed to convince the robot to change sides. And then we get to see what it's like in the Matrix from the android's point of view, how the android is experienced in the Matrix, and it is like what I imagine an acid trip would be like. It's very strange, there's a lot of weird colours, and it seems like a lot of the objects in this Matrix world cannot hold its shape, and it's morphing in and out into different shapes and different forms, like the robot's having some kind of mad dream and it can't quite comprehend what's happening to it. But then all of a sudden you get the impression that the robot starts to develop feelings for the woman it was chasing at the beginning of the cartoon. They actually seem to start to bond with each other. Back in the real world, there are a load of sentinels approaching the science lab, and all the alarms go off and everyone is unplugged from the Matrix. But unfortunately, they weren't given enough time and everyone is killed. The woman is badly injured, but the runner robot, who has now changed sides and become good, destroys the sentinel before it can kill the woman. The runner robot then takes the woman and plugs her unconscious body back into the Matrix, and then he plugs himself back in. Inside the Matrix, the runner approaches the woman with fondness for her, but then she opens her eyes and screams in horror and disappears as she dies in the real world. And as the short ends with the now converted runner robot sitting staring out to sea as the woman was doing at the beginning of the cartoon. Yeah, that one, like all of the others I mentioned, they have got these quite deep undertones to them. They're quite dark in some ways, but I think they are very good and they are well worth a watch. They really do flesh out some of the... Like I said, you don't really need to watch them to get an understanding of the film, but they do fill in a few gaps that are missing from the film. Now, the Wachowskis actually had the idea of making the Animatrix when they were in Japan promoting the first Matrix movie. They visited the creators of some anime movies that they had always drawn inspiration from and been massive fans, and a collaboration was agreed upon with some of these animators. In the shorts featuring Neo, Trinity and the Kid, the original movie actors all voiced their own animated versions. The CGI short, Final Flight of the Osiris, was shown in cinemas before the movie The Dreamcatcher. I think that was a Stephen King film. And the rest released on DVD in 2003 to coincide with the release of The Matrix Reloaded. So, as I said, the Animatrix provided a bit of a backstory, but it didn't provide all the fillers for the empty plot points. It didn't tell you absolutely everything you needed to know to understand the story completely. And if you're anything like me and you're a completionist and you need to know absolutely everything about the story of the Matrix, you had to go out and you had to buy a video game called Enter the Matrix and play that. And interwoven into this video game, you had all these cutscenes, which actually filled in a lot of gaps for the Matrix Reloaded. But like I said, with the Animatrix, it wasn't essential to play the game. It wasn't essential to watch the Animatrix. You could still understand the three films without watching any of these, but it was a lot of fun, and I, for one, am glad that I did both. Now, the game was released on the PC, GameCube, Xbox and PS2. In the game, you play as either Ghost or Niobe, played by Anthony Wong and Jada Pinkett Smith, who, as you know, appeared in the main movie and actually provided their voices for the game. The game starts with you collecting a message left for you by the crew of the Osiris. You remember the Animatrix short? You see how it all ties in now? And then the game seems to interweave with the Matrix Reloaded movie, For example, you remember the scene where Morpheus has the keymaker on back of the lorry on the freeway chase, and the agent jumps onto the back of the lorry and Morpheus and the agent have a fight. I think Morpheus is using a sword, and the agent is like dodging all these attacks, and then eventually Morpheus gets knocked off the back of the truck and lands on the front of Niobe's car, who saves him just in time. Well, there's a mission in the game where you have to race on the freeway to reach Morpheus on the truck before he falls, which I thought was quite cool. The Wachowskis also filmed over an hour of original footage with the original cast to include in the cutscenes of the game to flesh out the story. These scenes only appeared in the game, you didn't see them in the movie. I mean, here's a good example. In the second movie, Smith captures a character called Bane and copies himself onto him. Then he uses a phone to return to the real world. But once Bane is brought out of the Matrix, he's no longer Bane, he is now Smith. Because somehow Smith has transferred his consciousness into Bane's brain somehow. So Bane, or Smith, sabotages one of the ships with an EMP. The problem is, in the movie, this is simply commented on and you never actually see Smith sabotage the ship. You get more info on this missing scene in the actual cutscene in the video game. And I always thought that there was something missing from the movie, and that's because you had to play the game to see that scene. Now, the game wasn't a hit with critics, although the sales were good, the reviews were bad. Many said the game felt rushed and incomplete, and others' complaints were that you couldn't play as Neo, although fans would later get a chance in the next Matrix game starring Neo, which was called The Path of Neo. For me, I thought these games were great. I thought they were very, very good. I really enjoyed playing them at the time. I spent hours playing them, and I enjoyed the fact that I could see all these extra scenes that weren't in the film that give me a little bit more insight into the movie and made the movies make more sense. So now we've covered the Animatrix and we've covered the game. I think now we need to talk a little bit more about the second movie, The Matrix Reloaded. This movie is set 6 months after the first movie. In this movie, we learn about the Sentinels drilling towards Zion. We learn that Neo is now practically unbeatable in the Matrix. This is until we learn that Agent Smith is back, but he's no longer an agent now. He's kind of unplugged from the Matrix and free to wreak havoc by multiplying himself and corrupting the Matrix like a virus. This movie is generally regarded not as good as the original, and I must agree, it's not as good as the original, and you can't beat the original film. However, this movie is still very entertaining, and we get some awesome, awesome scenes in it. There's a scene just after Neo talks to the Oracle, and then the Oracle leaves, and then he has to fight hundreds and hundreds of Smiths. That was a brilliant scene. I absolutely loved that scene. I think it was called the Burly Brawl. The downside is the overuse of CGI. Some of it, well, a lot of it looks fake, very fake. The first movie had a lot of practical stunts that made it look 100% better. This one relied more on virtual cameras instead of practical cameras, and as we know, the practical camera effects in the first movie were like 100 times better than you would get in this one. It just looked fake. But all that being said, as fake as this scene actually does look, I actually love this scene, and I always find it really entertaining to watch. This fight scene is amazing, it's top notch, and I love the scene where he rips the pole out of the ground and starts kicking all the agents as he kind of holds on and pivots around the pole. Fantastic scene. It is really gripping, that scene, and it is good. As fake as it looks, it is good. And then there's the awesome highway chase. We have Trinity with the keymaker speeding in and out of traffic at very high speeds whilst the agents chase them, and there's a lot of practical and a lot of CGI effects mixed in with this, but it does look good. And interestingly, the highway the Wachowskis used for this scene was actually built especially for the movie. The freeway was 1.5 miles long, and apparently all of the sets that they used in the movie was recycled and used to build houses in Mexico, which was very, very cool. Another great fight scene is when we see the Merovingian's men all fight Neo on the chateau staircase, and we see Neo defeat all of them with various weapons. This fight scene is so fluid and it just works really well. And we also see a return of the wire fu stunts, which was quite refreshing, and I don't think they actually used that much CGI in this. It didn't look like it anyway. It looked like they relied a lot on the wire stunts rather than CGI, which I appreciated in this scene. Very enjoyable scene. I love this scene. Now, one negative for me is when the characters are not in the Matrix. When they are in Zion, I'm very bored. There's just so much expedition. In fact, I was rewatching the movies for this episode for my research, and I actually fell asleep during the scenes where they're back in Zion. It's just so boring to me, but I understand that these scenes are needed to build up the vision of Zion, so you get an understanding of what Zion is, and you get the understanding of the risk of losing Zion to the machines, but my god, it is so boring. I just wish they cut a little bit more of that out. Because I just hold no real interest with the characters down there in Zion. Because even though they spend such a long time with these characters, they don't really flesh out any of the characters, and you don't get an attachment to them. That's one of the gripes I had with it. And then we have the scene with the architect when Neo goes to the source. The scene was so confusing when I first saw it. The architect guy talks like a machine, and he's very hard to follow. After a few viewings, I started to understand and get the gist of what he was going on about. And I do actually enjoy this scene. I think it is a very good scene, although initially it was hard to follow. And I remember when I first watched this movie, I had to keep rewinding that scene to try and get a better understanding of it, and I started feeling a little bit stupid, if I'm honest. I started feeling like, God, am I just not getting... Is everyone else getting this and I'm not getting it? Is it that simple and I'm just not seeing what's happening here? But then, on the special features of the DVD, there's actually a very funny spoof of The Matrix Reloaded, which was filmed for the MTV Movie Awards featuring Justin Timberlake and Sean William Scott. We actually see the pair react scenes from the film and poke fun as they go along. One scene that sticks out for me is when they meet the architect, who in this version is played by funny man Will Ferrell, and he is absolutely hilarious in this. In his scenes, he just mimics the scene from The Matrix Reloaded, and he just talks total nonsense, and he's talking like he did in The Matrix Reloaded, and then at one point he actually stops and he says, you know what, I have no idea what I'm saying. I just thought it'd make me sound cool. And I just really appreciated that in the MTV Movie Awards scene, because it just made me think, oh, no one else gets it as well. I'm not the only one. They wouldn't have made a joke up about this if I'm the only one who doesn't get it. But eventually I did get it, and I did get the gist about how the Matrix has been made 6 or 7 times over, and every time it's made, it restarts again, and the program learns from its mistakes. And Zion is ultimately destroyed but allowed to rebuild again, and the cycle then continues. So eventually I did get it, but I must admit there are some elements of the Matrix I still don't fully understand, but I think that's the beauty of the film. I don't think you're meant to fully understand everything. And then we get on to the third film, The Matrix Revolutions, which was actually released the same year as The Matrix Reloaded. The movie starts with Neo stuck in a train station that is supposed to represent some kind of loading program in the Matrix, and in this loading program he's totally powerless. Also, he isn't physically jacked into the Matrix, because in the last movie, Neo, Trinity and Morpheus had to flee the Nebuchadnezzar when Sentinels attacked, and as the Sentinels approached, Neo discovered he could feel them and actually use his abilities outside of the Matrix, destroying the Sentinels, but this put Neo in a coma-like state, which wisely logged him into the Matrix in the train station. They believe that after his encounter with the architect in the second film, it somehow made him Wi-Fi, I suppose. I don't know. That's what I mean when I said there's some things that aren't explained fully, and you have to just kind of make your own mind up. I sound like the Oracle now. Eventually, Trinity and Morpheus find Neo, but not before a very strange fight scene where the villains run around the ceiling while shooting at Morpheus and Trinity and Seraph, the Oracle's guard. This scene mirrors the lobby shoot-up from the first movie, but nowhere as impressive, but nonetheless enjoyable. After they find Neo, they must race against the clock to beat the machines that are drilling towards Zion, as we see the population of Zion prepare for war, and once again, we're swamped with boring expedition. You know, and I said that realising that we need this expedition, we need to know what's going on, but I just can't help but be so bored by these scenes. Neo realises that he needs to go to the machine world to make a deal with the main machine, which is portrayed by kind of all these little robots gathering together and creating like a great big baby face. So they did the main robot, which is in charge of the Matrix, and everything is kind of portrayed as like a baby. Didn't really like that, but there you go. That's what we got. So Neo makes a deal that if he enters the Matrix and stops Smith from infecting the entire Matrix and destroying everything, that the machine world will stop their attack on Zion and live in peace, and also free any humans from the Matrix who want to be freed.